that when you get right down to it, all compositions are first and foremost abstractions, with some abstractions having a higher degree of recognizable representation and others being less so or completely non-representational.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Mastrius for this sneak peek with artist and mentor Ken Goldman. At Mastrius, you get personal feedback, teaching, advice, and support from a master artist of your choice so you can reach your goals in your style at your pace. I am your host, Lynn Mazzara, and today I am thrilled to introduce Mastrius mentor Ken Goldman, who is going to be sharing with us Draw or Paint Anything, Back to Basics, Figures, Portraits, Landscapes, and Still Lifes, Academic or Expressive. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Ken. Ken Goldman is a renowned international artist, author, teacher, and art juror with numerous awards and exhibitions spanning Holland, Paris, Italy, Greece, China, Colombia, Mexico, and prominent U.S. cities including New York, Boston, and Washington, D.C. In California, he has showcased his work at venues such as the Oceanside Museum of Art and the Autry Museum of the American West. His pieces have also been featured in multiple exhibitions across China, where he was invited to lecture about watercolor at 6 different universities. Goldman's works are part of the permanent collections at the San Diego Museum of Fine Art and several other notable museums. He curated significant exhibitions at the Oceanside Museum and Hilbert Museum, celebrating the National Watercolor Society's rich history. An author of 17 instructional art books and a contributor to various international art magazines, Ken has been a successful professional artist since 1976 and began his mentoring and teaching career in 1984. He is a former president of the National Watercolor Society and is represented by CaliforniaWatercolor.com Gallery. Welcome, Ken. Mastrius is so excited to have you join our group of artist mentors.
Enjoying the video? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when new Mastrius videos are added.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I am really excited to find out about Draw or Paint Anything, Back to Basics. You're saying figures, portraits, landscapes, and still lifes, academic or expressive. That seems like a pretty big promise to me. Can you talk a little bit about why you are calling this view and your mentorship, this title?
Well, I guess it's kind of selfish because I enjoy mentoring students with such a wide variety of creative approaches and techniques. I guess from academic to realism to out of the box expressive whimsy. I just really like it all. The several the several basics that beginners learn in any credible art school or atelier are the same basics that professional artists still use right to the end as they problem solve their own paintings. One of the things I've learned in teaching is I expressly give the basics, but the professionals in my classes like to listen to it as much as the beginners. And it's like when you're advanced, you enjoy hearing what you may have forgotten. And when you're beginning, you love to hear what it is you're looking forward to learning. So I guess professionals have learned through the years of trial and error that whenever anything goes wrong in a painting or drawing, it's usually because one or more of the several basics were overlooked. And there really are only a few basics in drawing, but they're all so important. The main difference between professional and beginners is that when a problem arises for a professional, they know which of the essential basics to use, while beginners are just beginning to learn what they are. So these essential basics are what I will constantly be using to critique and share with my upcoming group.
I still can't wrap my head around the fact that something so basic can allow me to draw or paint anything. Um, how is that possible? Um, is it how you draw it? Is it what you draw?
Well, I think it's, you know, it's really a question of having enthusiasm. And you remember how as beginners we strove to draw things in their minutest details?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's
Yes.
way too hard. I mean, once an artist learns how to see the entire world of possible subjects as a series of combined shapes and values, rather than things, and learns time-tested methods of drawing shapes accurately, it then becomes possible to depict anything in any manner of realism, expressionism, abstraction, whatever. I mean, figures, portraits, landscapes, still lives, or whatever are no longer that different from one another. I guess for a well-rounded artist, choice of subject matter isn't an issue because everything identifiable as this or that just becomes a series of interesting shapes to be drawn. And I mean, that may sound abstract in a way, but essentially, once you learn these skills, that just becomes a reality. And I think like keeping your eye on the ball in tennis, it's something that may be hard to do, but if you do it, it just makes a big difference.
I'm excited. Just for everybody watching, you have put together a beautiful presentation to visually show us what you're talking about here. So we will be showing that shortly. But I myself just wanted to know how, like you said, everything everything can be drawn um, in detail or in abstraction just by learning to see the shapes and the values of what we're looking at. I'm thinking that's what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, I guess what I'm really saying, and I see your piece back there, and you maybe are semi-objective, maybe heading toward abstraction. I just believe that when you get right down to it, all compositions are first and foremost abstractions, with some abstractions having a higher degree of recognizable representation and others being less so or completely non-representational. I like to call underlying important abstract movements in any painting flow lines or flowing gestures. Whether I'm teaching figure drawing, landscape, still life, or whatever it is, I look for these flowing gestures. A good abstraction makes a good composition. Poorly designed abstractions make poor compositions. Varied shapes on an underpinning of beautiful, graceful gesture lines may or may not be representational, but if there's a flow to them and the shapes fit together harmoniously, I think the painting will then be successful. That's just my opinion.
That's why we're here, to get your opinion, to get your information. And I'm thinking now might be a good time to jump into that document you want to share with us and talk a little more in detail about some of these concepts. What do you think?
Yeah, that's good. I just wanted to maybe stress one other thing is the attitude, because when people approach this, it's always the glass is half full or half empty. And ideally, keeping enthusiasm, curiosity, and innocence we have as beginners for as long as possible. That's the attitude I'm looking for. And, beginners don't give a second thought about entering shows, competing, showing in galleries and all of that. And, I've taught now for almost 50 years, and I'm always a little saddened when students start asking about entering this or that competition, because that's when the road sometimes becomes rocky. Anyway, one of the things when I teach drawing, I have a saying to beginners: don't try to make it perfect, just make it better and better. Keep your kneaded eraser handy, because drawing is a series of corrected shapes. Do your best, have fun, remove fear and self-doubt, and then drawing becomes a process of step-by-step refinement rather than some kind of an agony and something to be afraid to do.
I
And
like that.
the main thing is to learn to just when you have a bad attitude, the attitudes are like weeds, you know, and you just need to keep on weeding. Our mental gardens require constant weeding. And my solution is just constantly replace any nagging doubts with action, replace doubts with work, even if that means just doing menial art-related activities. Just hold on to a deep curiosity and love of personal experimentation. You know, work hard, see what happens with no attachment to results. Correcting negative thoughts and following up on action is my idea of practicing good attitude. And, you know, and finally, there's a famous saying I like to use for myself when I start to get a bad attitude, and it's by Goethe. Only begin and the mind grows heated. Only begin and the task is completed. Anyway, I just wanted to add that.
Only begin and the mind grows heated. Only begin and the task is completed. That's actually really deep.
Yeah, in other words, get started. You know,
Yes.
it's amazing what a difference it makes when you just start working and get that momentum going. So
Okay.
anyway, yeah.
I am excited. I am excited to see your presentation and see this as being a visual artist, seeing the pictures.
Okay, well, let me share my screen with you. This is one of the PDFs that I put together for a class I taught. And when I mentor, what I like to do is create PDFs. First of all, I listen to everybody carefully and I find out what it is they want to do and try to make sure whatever it is that I'm teaching is very nicely tailored to what a person came to me for. So this was drawing and painting the nude and clothed figures. I've taught figure drawing for a long time, but it really, the basics you learn in figure just apply to everything. So I just wanted to quickly go over some of those basics. First off, you can see here, it's about learning to turn gestural two-dimensional shapes into three-dimensional forms. And you can see how I'm stressing the negative shapes around things. And I'm also stressing the simplicity of keeping your shapes looking like shapes. So when you draw at the beginning, try not to get too caught in details. Instead, use just straight lines, slightly curved lines, or S-curved lines. So in order to see the figure as a whole, for instance, you can see how I'm seeing the outer shape. This is actually called an envelope by a lot of artists. And some use it, some don't, but I like to try and squint my eyes and see everything. And then once I see that, I can create a silhouette like this, and even a complex form like this for a shortened figure. You can see right here is put into the envelope, and then I'm looking at the negative shapes. All these little areas around here and here and here, that becomes almost more important to me than the figure I'm trying to draw. That would be analogous to keeping your eye on the ball when you're playing tennis rather than looking into the court. So a few things that I teach, and this applies to anything that I teach. And I'm only starting here with figures because that's what this was intended for. But you can see how there's very simple, basic anatomical structures that I like to have students look for. But rather than making those too abstract, I like to start with a silhouette, something as simple as this. And all of these figures were done in 2 minutes. But like you can see here, I'm basically just getting the general silhouette, which puts me into seeing the whole figure. And once I see the figure, then I usually go to contour drawing, which you can see is included in those 2 minutes. And you're basically looking for negative shapes, just like I did up here. So in my mind, I'm seeing the envelope, I'm seeing the negative shapes, and I'm keeping my lines as simple as possible. Then the second thing that is important is seeing the basic shapes as volumes, because everything is flat, and so you're basically making it three-dimensional. Let's see, so this is an example of how I'm adding a little bit of cylinders, and I'm using my point of view to see where to draw them. That's a skill that you develop just through a lot of practice. And if you're in a sketch group, and I don't know how many of you go to sketch groups, I do it at least 2 to 3 times a week because I like to stay in practice. These are an example of 2-minute gestures. And then here you can see a 5-minute gesture.
So how important is it to work on your sketching abilities?
I personally, I think it's important if you have a life drawing possibility, it's really good to draw from life. But if not, there's lots of really good videos online now, and I have about 42 of them I like to give to my students or to people who are in our Zoom classes. I think it's really important, Lynn, because otherwise you just get rusty, and you'll find that I find when I'm giving a demonstration, especially if it's doing figures, the first 1 or 2 figures are usually not too good. And then as I get warmed up, once the mind grows heated, the task is completed.
Okay,
So
and
in those same sketches, this is an example after the warm-ups, getting into like maybe a 40-minute pose where the model holds the same pose for 2 times. I don't know, did that answer your question?
yes, it did very much.
Yeah. So most of these were done on newsprint, and then this is where I switched to good paper, and I like to put a lot of the sketches on one piece of paper to see if I can compose an entire sheet. So this is an example of some of my 20-minute sketches on a better pad. A lot of people like to learn portraiture, and when I teach portraiture, once again, it's about seeing shapes first. I do teach head structure. I like the luminous method, and I also like direct observation, where you're really just learning to discipline yourself to see shapes of light and shapes of shadow, if you have them. So that's something that I would be going into if anybody is interested. And then watercolor. Watercolor to me is an extension of drawing, especially it's a lot like charcoal drawing for me, but the difference is, of course, it's very wet. I've got lots of videos where you can see me drawing uh, and then turning the drawing into a painting where I work very upright and I just let the drips flow. But these are some examples of the figure drawings approached the same way as what I just showed you, except I'm using wet washes. And usually I like to teach different ways of handling the wet paper. I like to have people start with just wet into wet. This is an example of a gesture showing the gesture lines. And this is an example of adding a little bit of line to what I've done and just letting some of the washes blend together. Skin tones are a mixture of red, yellow, and green or blue. And that's whether you're light colored or dark colored. It doesn't really matter. Those are the colors that you make flesh with.
Mm-hmm.
And these are some examples of quicker sketches, all in 1 minute. These are some 10 or 15-minute studies. You can see that I'm not a tight painter when I work quickly. I like to see the shapes and see the values and be pretty free with my application.
Oh, these are just wonderful.
Thank you. Thank
So
you.
much emotion comes through just your brush work and the colors you've chosen.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I really try to keep these 20-minute and 15-minute sketches as simple as possible. And, once we get into mentorship, if anybody's interested in watercolor, I do watercolor, but I also do acrylics and oils. Oh, this is an interesting example of taking a whole 3-hour sketch session and adding my figures to 1 page of watercolor with tape attached to the before I get started. And so you can see that I pull the tape later on after a lot of the figures have been sketched in, and it makes an interesting collage of figures.
It does. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's got a little bit of a dominance of red with some touches of green. So you've got your color harmonies working, but at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, you've got some drawing. This is an example of I gave a demonstration in Colorado showing how I'll take a figure, and I like to actually send some of these out to my students so they can work with it to see how much extra energy you can put into it. You can see how the dog is pulling her, but how much more she can be uh, made to look like she's really being pulled. And then this was I think 20 minutes worth of figures I put together as part of the demonstration. It might have been a little longer than that, but you can see I took some of these drawings and added them into this and added some tape. So going further, this is a figure that I spent a lot more time on. This is my friend Carlos. And what I'm illustrating here is how you can do a painting on watercolor with just a white background. And when I do that, I like to show a little bit of the reality of watercolor, which is that it's runny and drippy. I felt that it needed something, so I decided to bring out his warm tones by putting a cooler background with some arbitrary shapes. So that's one of the things I'm really big on is, teaching how to set up poses with varied background strategies. This is in my new book, Essential Human Anatomy for Artists. But the idea here is there are different ways to set up a thumbnail structure with uh, basically light gray, dark, and using accents of black or white. You can see here, this is dark against light, light against dark against light up here with light against dark down here. This is a combination, and this is a figure against a curve and a figure against a straight. So those are important things I think that I can offer.
Do you always start your paintings with some kind of study like this, initial drawing, a value study, and then get more detailed before you actually get into the paint?
That's a great question. When I'm doing plein air, not so much. I usually just jump in. I'll sometimes do a little value study, but for the most part, I really like to see what happens along the way. So sometimes I do, but those are mostly teaching aids for me.
Okay.
But when I set my poses, I keep all those things in mind. But I just wanted to show the same principle applies to animals and birds. You can see here how I am seeing this mutt, which I saw in Colombia, as a very flat shape. This isn't necessarily how I would start drawing it, but this is certainly how I see it, as a very two-dimensional form. And then once I get started, I'll add cross contours very lightly, and you can see that I'm basically adding cylinders or blocks or whatever I need to create volume on this guy. And then whatever I decide to do here, that informs how my stroke directions are going to be. And that really applies to drawing anything. And if you look at the masters, you'll see that they really used a lot of cylinders and blocks when they constructed their figures. So I'm just going to very quickly go through a few of the things that I can teach, except that I'm going to use birds to illustrate them because I was an ornithologist. So these are two lapwings, which I saw in South America. And this is an example of cross contour lines creating a sense of volume. And then, like I did with the dog, I'm glazing the color on over the cross contours. These are, I probably thought this way, but I drew this way. And this is what a drawing with watercolor would look like. So these are various approaches to drawing. And I think a good place to start, you asked about thumbnails. When I do bird drawings and still lives, I do like to work small first. So as opposed to drawing from the figure or doing plein air. These are some studies I made of an Inca jay. These are all done in Colombia. and a cock of the rock. I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're amazing.
Oh,
Don't e-
wow.
yeah, sometimes their beak doesn't even show. And so these are very small. This is all done on a 9 by 12 sheet of paper. So you can see how small something like this can be. And being the curious sort of ornithologist I am, I looked up the skull structure of a cock of the rock and drew it out because I really wanted to understand why the heck does all this beak get covered up by all this feather? So that's what this page is about. It's about me solving my curiosity about the cock of the rock.
And I just want to share
Yeah.
that Ken was an exhibition designer at the San Diego Natural History Museum and the San Diego Zoo. So he has an extensive background in wildlife art.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for reminding everyone. Yeah. Those were some fun days for me. So anyway, going further during my trip, I'm composing with the 7 elements and 8 principles of design, which are really important to me. And I will really look forward to sharing with you. This is an example of watercolor. This is on toned paper, watercolor and white gouache on toned surface. I like to take transparent watercolors with me on trips because they don't dry out and crack like gouaches do. So that's an example of adding white. And then this is a transparent watercolor where I'm adding deliberately another design element of bubbles because I thought, you got all these round heads and round bodies, why not? And I've surfed also for most of my life, and this is a scene I see so often at the beach, the hustle and bustle of the sandpipers. This is an example of working with a very limited palette. Am I going too quickly?
No, not at all.
Okay. This is watercolor with wet into wet background. This is a bird that I actually saw through binoculars in Barbados. And after doing a lot of sketches, I went and carefully painted the flower I saw him on all the time. I don't really know what it is, but I sure love it. And these are some birds I saw in Trinidad and Tobago. And this is an example of watercolor with an airbrushed background, where I masked off the birds and I masked off the leaves and then sprayed the background.
Oh, I would have thought you had done it the other way around. That looks wonderful.
Yeah, I don't use masking that often anymore, but when I do, I really love it. And it's a good way to keep your transparency for a long time. And so this is an example of abstract watercolor where I basically put down washes and laid saran wrap over it and just wanted to see what happened. And then after that was done, I painted this hummingbird over it so you can see what is underneath this.
Oh, that looks wonderful.
Yeah, so the abstraction kind of indicated what colors I wanted to use. You can kind of see how I pulled the flowers out of that. This is an example of people know me for my veiled watercolors, which I started doing in the early 80s, which is working with a very limited palette. Like this is probably Viridian, magenta, and burnt sienna, and maybe neutral tint. And I start with just a lot of colors and I leave my whites and I begin to sense form and bring the avocets out at the very end. This is the same, except I brought out cardinals, and this will be an example of one of my semi-abstracted compositions. This is just basically 3 colors. I believe it's turquoise, magenta, and a touch of aureolin. And then I did practice sumie, which is Asian brush painting, for about 4 years. And it really influenced my watercolors. This is an example of many that I have, but I like this one in particular, just showing how a little bit of wet into wet and a little bit of dry brush and the strokes that you learn from studying the 4 gentlemen, the bamboo, chrysanthemum, plum blossom, and orchid, teach you basically how to do any stroke you want to do. Any questions, Lynn?
No, I am in awe of your
Yeah.
repertoire
Thank
of just the amount of knowledge and information and style about everything.
Oh,
You
Yeah.
said in your title, back to basics. What would you consider the basics? Like, are there 4 or 5 main things?
Yeah, I mean, the basics are really learning to remember and constantly enforcing that shapes, not things, and to know basically you want to know the basics such as values. I mean, the 7 elements are of course important. Things like line, shape, uh, size, direction, color, value, texture, learning those, and then how to put them together and design. So like, contrast, harmony, unity, dominance, yeah, all that kind of thing, which may sound complicated, but really that's all you need to know. And I just keep enforcing that over and over again. And when it comes to drawing or painting, it's learning to relax, especially in watercolor, and let the water do itself. So I don't know if that answers that.
Yes, yes, it does. And it reminds me what you said at the very beginning. When we're beginners, we're absorbing all this like a sponge because we didn't know what we didn't know. But at more experienced artists, sometimes it's good to go back to the basics to remember, like you said, why isn't this painting working? Oh, I have to check my values. Oh, I have to check my colors or my lines.
That's exactly right. And that's also, I teach people to self-critique using those. I have a mnemonic, which I'll share, which helps people to remember it. And I'm not going to go into it now, but those 7 elements and 8 principles of design, knowing those, you can really figure out practically everything. So those will be the basics that I will be stressing. Anyway, to move on, this is basically a little bit of indigo with burnt sienna, and using once again my ability to do sumie or Asian brushwork. And these are some sketches, field sketches of hummingbirds. And I use these then to quickly do studies like this one. I do, these are very small, and I'll sit down and just knock these out because I like the idea of trying to see, well, how many can I get hard edges, lost edges, and semi-hard edges working in one little painting. And doing these small practice studies is just worth everything because you get so much practice under your belt. And then going into acrylic, this is a fairly large, I believe this is 48 by 24 inches. And this is again a study in birds, but it's also a study in design and transparency.
And your acrylics are just as amazing as your watercolors.
Oh, thank you. And then this is interesting where I'm actually, when Golden Paint first came out with their pumice gels in I think it was the 90s, they asked me to product test them, and I tested them, and you can see, if you look close, there's like pumice in here. And if you add pumice to your paints, then you can scumble over them. You just get some really interesting dry brush effects like this. So that's an example of using pumice. And you can see when I talk about the flow of abstraction, this is where I'm introducing recognizable objects into a flow of abstraction. And then this is a larger one. This is actually 4 separate canvases. And this, I've taken it further. This is from a model that I actually sketched from life and I abstracted. And so really that's all I wanted to share. And for anybody who is interested in signing up or becomes part of it, I will be sending this DVD, not DVD, well, this PDF with these DVDs included in it. And it also has some of the products that I recommend. And that's really all I have to share, Lynn.
Well, it was incredible amount of information in a very short time. I am in awe. You are obviously a master artist, and your 50 years of experience shows. And I think my biggest takeaway from this with everything else that you've said is that saying that you shared with us, only begin and the mind grows heated, only begin and the task is completed. How often do we sit around thinking about what we want to do, but we don't actually put the pencil to the paper? So this gives me so much encouragement to just start.
That causes my heart to soar like a hawk.
Good. I want to ask you one question before we close off. Is there one piece of advice or encouragement that you would give an artist that you wish you had heard, but when you were just starting out?
Yeah, I would say remember the enthusiasm you had when you first started out and the reason you started out in the first place. And that good attitude that you had, carry that along with you as long as you possibly can. And for as long as you possibly can, please do not try to compare your progress to others. Instead, look and see what they're doing. And if it inspires you, be humble enough and open to learning enough to include what they're doing in your work or to ask them how they did it. But whatever you do, do not ever become intimidated. Those are the weeds that I want you to constantly be looking for and taking out.
That is fabulous, fabulous advice, because especially when you're starting out, but even after many years, you still have that little bit of insecurity, or like you said, comparing yourself to others, and it's poison. We need to just hang on to our joy in creating.
I completely agree. And even at my stage, I can see where the tendency could be there, but I think it's kind of afraid to enter into my arena at this point because it knows that I'm just going to swat it away. It knows me better than that.
Well, I just want to sign off by saying at Mastrius, everything we do is live and interactive and online. So you can get your questions answered in real time and learn exactly what you need to reach your goals, whatever they are. I'm a member at Mastrius and I absolutely love it because I am learning and growing my skills so much faster than when I was working on my own. And the community of artists here is so supportive and welcoming. I hope you will join us. You can find more information and a list of our almost 300 mentoring artists at mastrius.com. Please check us out.